Good evening. My name is Nicole Wiedemann. I'm the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Programs at the School of Architecture, and I'm also one of the co-chairs for the ACSA conference. I'm very pleased to welcome our guests from around the country, in fact, around the world from the ACSA. And I also want to welcome our local practitioners. We have a nice turnout from AIA, as well as our faculty and students, including some of my first-year students in the crowd. I'm very proud of you. And I also want to remember to invite you all to a reception following the lecture, which will be in the Eden and Halbox courtyard, which is in Goldsmith Hall. So for many of you, you just return to the place that you were at prior to the lecture, and we'll walk you back as well. Now, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce a visionary architect and the 2011 MacArthur Fellow, Jeanne Gang, who is the founder and principal of Studio Gang Architects. Her firm is a Chicago-based collective of architects, designers, and thinkers whose projects confront pressing contemporary issues. In 2006, I had the pleasure of visiting the office. She graciously showed me the studio full of models, sketches, materials, drawings, and all of this on a Saturday morning following her yoga class. I was really quite impressed. And I remember walking into a small room, perhaps it was the model shop at the time, I'm not sure, and it was filled with a large model. And the large model had the Aqua Tower that I think we all know, surrounded by Chicago buildings. And it was a web of strings, just showing tangled relationships between views and sun angles, all carefully nested within the context of Chicago. And this room, for me, really epitomized the creativity, curiosity, and intelligence that has led to the many successes of Jeanne and Studio Gang Architects. And it is this atmosphere that has continued to beckon our students, both as professional residency interns and also those as graduates. Lindsay Moyer, one of ours, is still in her office there. The transformative potential of her work is exemplified by recent projects, such as the Aqua Tower, which was completed in 2010, Northerly Island Framework Plan, Nature Boardwalk at Lincoln Park Zoo, and Columbia College, Chicago's Media Production Center, hopefully some of which we'll have the opportunity to see tonight. Known for pursuing a future where the urban and natural worlds interweave, Jeanne's work has been honored and exhibited widely, most notably at the International Venice Biennale this year, MoMA, the National Building Museum, and the Art Institute of Chicago. A distinguished graduate of the Harvard University Graduate School of Design, she has taught at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, IIT, where her studios have focused on cities, ecologies, materials, and technologies. Reveal, her first volume on Studio Gang's work and working processes, was released in April 2011 from Princeton Architectural Press. In addition, her own insightful writings have been included in a number of publications, including Reinventing Construction, Negotiating Terrains, Manufacturing Material Effects, and many others. In many respects, through practice, teaching, and scholarship, Jeanne Gang seeks to answer questions that lie locally, site, culture, people, and resound globally, density, climate, sustainability, through her architecture. And if you would now welcome Jeanne Gang.
Thank you, Nicole. Hello, everyone, and thanks for coming tonight. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks especially to Donna Robertson, who invited me, the University of Texas at Austin, and the people organizing this amazing conference. I wanted to speak tonight a little bit about our work and our research practice, given the topic of the conference today. One of the things that have allowed me to really reflect on our process, and something that I'm really interested in that helps drive our work, has been the preparation for the show at the Art Institute of Chicago, which is on right now through February 24th in 2013. So if you have a chance to come to Chicago, please come see it. Zoe Ryan, who's the curator of the show, Zoe Ryan and Karen Keiss, came to me a couple of years ago and wanted to do a show on our work, on the show of a living architect, and something that's not really a retrospective, it's really just a kind of snapshot of what we have been doing and where we're possibly going. But I didn't realize that in preparing this show and designing the installation, that it would really give me a chance to step back and look at our work and really actually help me in terms of moving our work forward. The galleries there, this is inside the new modern wing of the Renzo Piano Museum at the Art Institute, has two major spaces. And in the first space, we're really highlighting projects that were selected by the curators, and also it features these installations that we created, designed, and installed for the show. One of the things that is really a staple in the practice is a material research, which we used here to study these spaces defined by ropes. They're hanging from the ceiling there, really kind of discovering a lot of different qualities that came from building full scale. In the second room, there's really a reproduction of our studio space kind of taken to the museum. Our first concept was that we would actually move to the museum and work there, but we found out that it's not allowed to make a profit while you're working inside of non-for-profit institution. And we were hoping that we would be making a profit over these 6 months. So we decided to trash that idea and just reproduce some of the qualities that take place inside of our studio and try to communicate those to both the general public who's coming to see something about architecture, but also to ourselves and to our colleagues. So in that space is where we really kind of delve into this process idea. And I guess the thing about that I realized was really that oftentimes the things that we do in the studio are really preparing us to make discoveries, or preparing ourselves to innovate, and preparing ourselves to act when the time is right. And so not everything in the studio is strictly project related. Some things are ongoing research. It's kind of like a lab that helps us, like I said, have these tools, be prepared to make a discovery. Together with the show, there is a catalog that I edited together with Zoe Ryan, with contributions by Sarah Whiting and Brett Steele, among others. But it really does kind of, it shows what's in the projects that are in the show, but shows these creative, process-oriented things that we've discovered. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about those categories, and then talk about some of our typological research in towers, and then go over a couple projects that are that we're currently working on that are designed with wood construction. I've been really interested in wood lately, and so some of those projects I'm going to talk about tonight as well. And then wrap up with a discussion about how all of us architects can be kind of take this public engagement in our practices. One of the first things is just that the research and references are kind of a key thing to our work, and they're really the cornerstone. So all of the precedents that you guys study in school, those are still really important in our practice, but not only the historical architectural research, but also expanding our readings to different fields that are project related. So in every project that we have in our office, there's a whole area that is devoted to these research and reference materials, and they kind of live together for the life of the project. This is a collection of the ones that were used for the Northerly Island framework plan, and they're there for everyone to use. But as the project moves along, these books and references that we're using get converted into lists, reading lists. Because one thing that I found in our practice is that projects will start and stop, and sometimes there's 2 and 3 years in between, beginning a project and then when you pick it back up again. So the reading list really serves to let people who are just entering the project maybe 2 years down the line that weren't there for the concept to just jump in and dive into the reading list and kind of get up to speed on a conceptual level of what we're talking about, instead of feeling like you're entering a project at the end and there's no more design. So that way we try to keep this thinking active all the way through the process of the project. Mockups and experiments are really important to the practice as well, and I think we've taken these well beyond the representational role they were traditionally used for clients. We use these models and mockups to help us understand qualities of materials, like in this case, plaster models that were used to study the possibility of using different mixes of concrete and letting them be expressed. Breaking things is also really important. These were tests done at IIT in the material testing lab for a project at the National Building Museum, breaking materials to just see how they react. And sometimes this is just out of curiosity. I think, every time I see a material, the first thing I want to do is throw it against a wall and see how it shatters. And those are all things that are, very learning experiences and getting the quality of the material, the characteristics, so that you understand them. And building full-scale mock-ups is also really important in our practice. Testing it, even if we're amateurs at making things and we're not the ones that will be really making them in the end of the day, understanding how they're made, it really improves our sensibilities and our abilities to detail for these materials. And then there's just improvisational play that happens in the studio, in the shop, a lot of times, things that are experimented with that might not be utilizable and efficient, uses over time, let's say. But what these things do, these experiments and playful experiments do, is they help build your toolbox, I guess, for lack of a better word, of things that you can deploy at a moment's notice. A lot of times we talk about tools, we're talking about digital tools and the amazing tools that we have at our disposal today. But I think I see the world as this uneven place where there's very analog tools and very digital tools, and we think that they work best when they support each other. Just picking up the best tool for the job is often really important. This is my partner, Mark, using just a magnifying glass as we take our working drawings and pin them up on walls, as opposed to always reviewing them on screen. And this helps us to catch things and make notes and communicate with each other. There's also measuring tools. I think, measuring things and understanding the orders of magnitude of things like light is a great design tool as well. There's also just a whole series of collected things that just are curiosities, and we try to, everyone brings in things to the office. We don't, it's not just a rarefied collections. People bring things in, and we talk about them. Finally, just the public engagement aspect. I know a lot of people have asked me, like, don't you hate doing public meetings? I used to think that, but my practice has evolved to where I really, I think that more and more public engagement is going to be crucial going forward for our practices, to be able to communicate what the desires are of the people that you're designing for, but also communicating design to the public. In our office, we also do these type of salons. This is a salon that we did with Mass Studio on the topic of ownership, but we've also done eco salons, and we invite people from outside into our office and have these discussions. I think these are critical. So I'm going to come back to public engagement at the end because I feel it's a very important part of our work today and going forward. Living in Chicago, it's a city of high rises, and I felt like the luckiest person on earth to be able to do a high-rise and at such a young age. And but since doing that, it's the one building type that I think it's so particular, and we've engaged on a number of concepts throughout the world now in different countries. It really is something that you build up expertise and you build up ideas about this building type. It's very particular. And so one of the things that we've been doing is trying to categorize the different ideas that we have so that we can deploy them when the opportunity arises. You know, originally the first building, tall building that I ever designed was the Aqua Tower, which started design in about 2004. So almost, well, 8 years ago now. And we had originally pitched kind of two concepts for this project, and the developer immediately picked this one because he kind of could understand how it was to be built. The real factor in high-rise design is time, and you know, if you think about adding just 3 or 4 hours on every floor of an 82-story tower, it ends up being months of time, and that is really the most expensive thing as they are financing these types of buildings. So in innovating for this building type, time is really one of the crucial things. Here we were really interested in this external spatial condition of people and sociability on the outside of the building, allowing views in between other buildings, and responding to the specific site. In the show, there's a piece, this is a photograph from the show that has this number of high-rise types that we've been working on and with different ideas. It's kind of a morphology of ideas that I think I can trace back to the Aqua Tower option 1 and option 2 into all kinds of concepts like solar carving as one. After Aqua, we worked on a tower called the Solstice Tower, where we tried to shape the building to get the best use of the southern sun in the winter and keep it out in summer. Things like shaping for wind, things like straddling, that ends up becoming something that we've confronted a number of times, where a tower can't just sit directly on the ground, it has to leap over something. And so these ideas lead to one another, and then they're almost like this toolbox that can be used and for a specific high-rise in a specific city. One project that we recently, I guess, unveiled was a project for New York, very close to the High Line. And there, all of the zoning regulations that were really developed around 1909 for allowing the sun to meet the street is really a form of solar carving that produced the step-back skyscraper. And what we encountered when we started to design on our particular site was a site that, if you look at the zoning envelope, it's right next to the High Line. And we would be required to step back the building from the street, which happens to be, you know, the West Side Highway, and really no obstructions to the west at all. But it allowed us to crowd up to and even overhang the High Line itself. So it was kind of a perversion of this zoning regulation, because it was designed to recognize that the public space is really the street and not the interior of the block. So that's what is really unique about it. This would be the shape of the building. You can see here the standard hotel right here. So really just jamming it right in there. So instead of stepping back from the street, and I should say we're in for approvals now, so I really don't know if they will acknowledge this argument, but because of the unique space of the public space on the interior of the block, we decided to start solar carving and carving away from the High Line from the inside out. So you can see how this building form is cut away to provide views over to the Hudson River and to provide daylight down to different parts of the High Line, which it creates, in a sense, a very different diagram, but it's based on the specific. So it's taking the concept that is in place for New York, but applying it in a very more intelligent way to this particular scenario. And so the view from the High Line would be this cut back piece, kind of faceted glass on all the parts that are carved away. And from the West Side Highway, you would have more of a straight up facade. Another project that grew out of these initial towers was the Hyderabad II project. In this case, it's almost the opposite. We're using the concept of self-shading because of the climate being really very hot in Hyderabad. This is a picture of the building. It's actually 4 towers that are interconnected around a very large courtyard, and with public spaces in the cracks between the towers. And so the development of the project really came about through looking at the self-shading techniques, also looking at different criteria that are specific to the place, like using the Vastu, which is similar to feng shui, but comes from Hindu architecture, and using digital tools. This is parametrically studying the courtyard. But in the process of designing this building, we discovered that there was the site was very far away from a lot of factories, and I started to look at block formations that didn't need to be fired. And I was shocked to find out that about 40% of the world's population lives in earthen homes still. We ended up purchasing a compressed block machine and bringing it to IIT. So I think the point here is just that there can be innovations on this kind of low end of the technology spectrum, and these things can have a huge impact on people's lives, given that so many people live in earthen homes. So what we've been doing here at IIT is looking at compressed block, working with material scientists at IIT to look at additives, and really thinking about how this building could be made, almost like a factory out on its open site where the building blocks are created without firing and thus less carbon produced. These are some of the examples of blocks. And then actually starting to look at the shapes and finding out what shapes would be easier to build with. So moving into wood, I mean, wood is one of my favorite building materials, and really because of the fact that it really is no carbon. I mean, trees are actually absorbing carbon. They're incredibly, you can see trees that go up to like equivalent of a 30-story building, standing there. They're flexible. And so there's something to be learned from trees, from wood, and it as well. Like I said, there is no carbon. They're actually holding carbon. So there's a lot of new advances with the technology in wood. One of the projects we recently completed was Lincoln Park Zoo Nature Boardwalk. And here's the pavilion that is completed now. And this project used a kind of glue laminated wood, but kind of considered the wood more like a piece of furniture, bending it 2 directions. Originally, this pond was like a 19th century picturesque version of nature in the city, with a 3-foot deep pond that was fallen into disrepair, this historic building on the site. And what we did with this project was, in addition to the wood pavilion, was really thinking about how to reimagine the pond and make it part of the city's infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure system. And at the same time, in doing that, it enabled a whole new habitat for the zoo, almost like a zoo without cages, where animals really want to be. This is some of the conceptual drawings, early conceptual drawings of how the pavilion would be put together. You can see on the left these steps in order to create the laminated structure. It was the first time that this process was used in the United States. So we had to go through a lot of approvals through Chicago building codes, tests and codes to have it accepted. But in the end, it really did work out to be very lightweight and enclosed with these fiberglass shells to make a space that was waterproof there. Some of the early models, so we were actually using card and board materials internally just because instead of doing a digital print, because we wanted to just, you know, wet it and bend it and get into the philosophy of the concept. Here's some of the mock-up pieces for the wood, and here's some image from installation. But it really came out very well. But the best thing is the combination of the pavilion and the habitat, this boardwalk, which has become very popular for people, but it's also really a great site for seeing different kinds of birds and animals. This is like year 2 starting to grow in. And you can see the relationship here with the historic building. The pond now is up to 20 foot deep in certain parts, and that helps the animals to be able to winter over and live throughout the seasons. And it also uses the edge of the pond to clean the runoff water that comes from all the urban areas around it. It ties into some of the, like I said, this earlier research we had been doing about animal populations and cities. And what's really interesting is that, you know, the city itself has become this important place to provide habitat for a lot of different animals in order to maintain biodiversity. Because if you think about the city's footprint growing out and out and out and bigger, it becomes harder for migratory pathways to run through those areas. Suburban areas are often just monocultures of grass, and there's not very many different food sources to support a biodiverse population. So as our own population is increasing, you see a lot of extinctions happening, predicted to be 20% of all populations extinct by 2030 of animals and plant populations. So ecology has been a very strong tenet in the work, and it comes out in different ways. But these activities of research can then feed into the projects that you're working on in hand. So these are some of the birds that are using the Lincoln Park Zoo Nature Center, but there are also a lot of coyotes. I guess there's something like 22,000 coyotes living in Chicago, in the city currently, and they're very secretive and things, but they actually keep the rat population down. And these two are photographed at the Lincoln Park Zoo Nature Center. This is what it looks like at night. And then the second project is using wood in a tensile way. You can see here from this image, it's a theater in Glencoe, Illinois, again pushing the limits of this material and starting to incorporate it into public spaces and public buildings again. We have Virendeel trusses here, and then a roof system that then suspends a gallery and walkway around the lobby space. And then we see that as extending out into the park nearby in a canopy walk. In Glencoe, the history of the place is really about logging. I mean, the first settlers there cut down all the trees and floated them down Lake Michigan. A bit later, it was replaced with farming, and then today it's actually re-wooded quite significantly. But there's this interesting correlation between the logging industry and in England, especially the development of the frame of the Tudor frame building. And so what's especially interesting in that development, you know, you could consider these Tudor buildings as almost like the first modern frame buildings. That Tudor era corresponds exactly with the development of modern theater. And so we found this interesting connection there, and we're able to convince the local authorities that this modern structure using wood was actually very connected to history, and they bought it, I guess. It is really fascinating. And the theaters, like you think of the best theaters in history, the Rose, the Globe, all of these were of Tudor construction early on. So you see this box hovering over the lobby, and that lobby space can then be used as almost like an informal and more urban space with the more traditional theaters behind. And this is a rooftop and one of the image of the model into the lobby. And then finally, the last wood project that I will show, we're actually working on a wood high-rise right now as well, but I'm not going to show that. I'm just going to talk about the Kalamazoo College. It's the Arcus Center for Social Justice Leadership. And here, we were approached by the college to design a building type that really didn't exist before. There really isn't a typology for social justice leadership. They did have a very strong program in social justice at Kalamazoo where students can go out to different parts of the world and do projects. They have scholars coming in to give lectures and to stay at the college, and they needed this conference center that would be able to exemplify their mission and give an identity to the building. This is the small college there in Kalamazoo, and our site is actually at the very corner of the college, adjacent to neighborhoods, and also adjacent to this wooded grove here. And what was interesting, though, was, to try to understand the space of social justice, we had to look at, a wide variety of things, urban spaces, different building types from different cultures, how the street has been used. This is from Occupy Wall Street. And this one is really interesting, too, from Tahrir Square during the Arab Spring. You can see how people almost self-organized into these central areas. This was a view from CNN, and you could actually go there during that time and see what was happening in all the different areas. But people created a system of spaces that would serve their needs, enable them to communicate and to gather and to pray and to eat. And I found it really fascinating and inspiring for this project. Also, we found in different cultures, like where elders meet in this meeting house in Mali, they made the ceiling really low so no one could stand up and get mad at each other. So they'd have to talk about things in a civil way. Same with this meeting house. There's always this element of fire, this kind of connection to the sky and earth and water. This is a step well in India, which is used for various purposes, some religious, some community spaces. So our floor plan kind of addressed these different contexts of the grove, the neighborhood, and then the campus beyond, and created an intersection where people would be able to run into each other and meet each other. Lots of different spaces, different types of spaces for meeting and gathering, surrounded with fireplace and food preparation, all around the central core. The architecture of the campus is really, it's a colonial style campus with some postmodern colonial versions in it, which didn't really connect with us for this mission of social justice. It just didn't seem to, work together as an identity. So we started looking to the grove and the woods around the building. We found there was a material here, this white cedar, and this is the range of the cedar in northern Michigan, including Kalamazoo, that we could use for the building. And then we discovered, as we started driving around the area, the presence of these vernacular barns. So these are like 100-year-old barns that were using wood, log ends, as they're called, in a masonry system. So this is actually a masonry building using wood logs that are about 18 inches deep, surrounded by mortar for the building. It's not just the barns. There were buildings like this, where you can see these are lasting, over 100 years, and they still look really great. So we've challenged ourselves to, would it be possible to revive this totally local building technique and apply it to a modern, 21st century building for social justice? And a lot of people, when you start to talk about these types of things, always warn you like that it hasn't been done, and you will, expose yourself to all kinds of lawsuits, blah, blah, blah. So, our approach has just been to methodically go through all the different resistance to doing so and figure out if there's a way that you can minimize those risks. You can see the beauty of this wall after 100 years. I really like the connection too to people. This is a shot on the left taken during Obama's inauguration. And then on the right, this whole pile of logs, each one individual, each one unique. And then we started to play with this, what could it be possible to do? This is one of the windows in the building, given this small unit that could be manipulated and warped in different places. And the other thing we did was we sought out, there was one guy who is still building this way. He's been making saunas, and he has been building these things for about 20 years. So we connected this guy, whose name is Rob Roy, and you can see him here in the background, with our contractors and ourselves, because we wanted to also understand how these walls were made by ourselves. But we brought with us the general contractor and some of the tradespeople, and did a workshop with him up in Michigan. And we built a sauna, basically, and learned just how the basic work is done so that then we could take it and innovate with it. One of the interesting things is the thermal break is done with sawdust here, and that's what gives you, plus you have a really enhanced thermally, a thermal wall in general, and a low carbon solution. These are just some of the model shots. And this project is beginning construction this fall, and so hopefully we will see it. We wanted to allow the building to be finished inside and out. It has to be ready for school, so there's a short time frame again. So we did the spanning members with steel, and we'll enclose the building so that the inside and the outside can be finished simultaneously. We're doing some computer sorting. It sounds kind of absurd, but it will really speed up the time to have these sizes sorted out and arrive on site in bundles so that people can just start putting them in and finishing the exterior wall. And this is what it will look like from the neighborhood side and from the campus side. Okay, and then just to wrap up, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the public engagement aspect of our practice. I oftentimes wondered why we do all this research and we do all these amazing projects, and then, the project is over and it doesn't really live on. And with the types of knowledge that we are gaining from the research, I feel like architects have a unique opportunity to bring together a lot of diverse experts to make a project that is communicative, where it can actually impact policy or impact things that we care about. And one of the things that I really care about is the environment, and especially in Chicago, the river, which is heavily polluted. And so we were having one of those eco salons I was telling you about, and we invited over some ecologists and people from the NRDC, Natural Resource Defense Council, and they started to talk about an idea of reestablishing a barrier in the Chicago River in order to stop the invasive species of carp who are coming up the Mississippi River on the way to Chicago. And so from that eco salon and meeting the right people at the eco salon and talking about this issue, we started to research the problem. I then offered a studio at the GSD for a graduate student level studio to take on this very complicated problem of the Chicago River and to propose ideas of what could be done. A lot of people know that, or they've heard that the Chicago River flows backwards, and it's not entirely true. it really is, there isn't that much flow in the river at all, actually. It's very flat, very still water. But when people refer to reversing the river, that what they mean is that about 1900, about, over 100 years ago, the series of canals was built, a very massive infrastructure project that would allow the Chicago River to connect over to the Des Plaines River and eventually to the Mississippi River. And because it was a deeper canal, this water can be drawn out of the lake. It was done to protect the drinking water of Chicago because at the time, the wastewater was being poured into the lake, and that is the drinking water source. So this was a solution to improving the drinking water and saving lives, but also it was a transportation issue of connecting really the Great Lakes all the way down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. But at the time, the thing is, like a lot of these major projects like this one, there's so many unforeseen consequences. So the problems that we're dealing with today are really very poor water quality. We really dump our raw sewage right into the river system still. Flooding, basements, the threat of the invasive species getting all the way to the Great Lakes, which would be, decimating about a $9 billion recreation industry. And then this potential of all this is kind of like post-industrial land. A lot of it is vacant right along the river system. So those are kind of the core things to look at. The invasive species was one thing. These are carp species that tend to jump out of the water when the boats go by, and they're huge fish, and it's very dangerous. It's very scary, actually. You can see this lady's frightened. And the students were working on, basically designing a dam that would reestablish this watershed separation, and what other potential things the dam could do, like connect neighborhoods, or it could also be a place to, an infrastructure piece that is also connective, produce new land, and solve some of the other issues around it. So their projects were very interesting, and they took on such amazing topics, and I hope that those students will, understand the role of the architect much differently since we did this studio. We, really did the research with all the different experts. They put together projects, and then the result of it, their work went into this book, the Reverse Effect book, which is actually, more of a policy piece and advocacy piece. We interviewed all the people that use the river and the potential for people to use it much more along the river, from rowing to tourism on boats to fishing, believe it or not. And after the studio and what went into the book, we ended up thinking, it's such a huge problem. People can't get their mind around undoing this infrastructure. So we came up with this series of potential steps that could be taken to eventually reestablish this divide. The first couple ones were, you could definitely acquire a lot of this property, and you could start to reduce the amount of stormwater going into the system, which will reduce the overflows, the CSOs, and eventually you could get to a system where you are really reclaiming most of the water, putting it back, and ultimately putting it back into the lake. So, Chicago uses an incredible amount of water every day just for diluting the sewage that comes out of the pipes. And then we gave an image. I mean, the image is so important, and that's another thing. I mean, in some ways, I really resist working with images in the beginning, but in communicating with the public is such a key piece of what we can do, and what I think how we can move issues, how we can move the needle on issues. This is an image of the Chicago riverfront, the South Branch, as it is today, with some of these, like the polluting fish plant. There's many deaths that are linked to this plant emissions on an annual basis. And then we show what it might look like once a new system of cleaning water and a new public spaces where people can reclaim the edge of the water and use it for public activities. And so this was the kind of also aspect in the book that I think, again, it's a strength that architects have to kind of reimagine what things could be in the future and help the public understand what they are. And the final thing I wanted to talk about is a little bit like of a more sad story, but I think, again, I feel like we were able to contribute something. This is Bertrand Goldberg. He was an architect in Chicago who designed the Marina City. He designed the Hillard Homes and Prentice Hospital, which was recently, it has been really a building from this era of the 70s that is, I think almost every architect knows this building that comes to Chicago. That's really quite an important building for our Chicago history. And the building, here's an image of it, is endangered because the Northwestern University, who owns the hospital and the land, wants to build a new research facility there, and they are planning on tearing this down. And so there's been a movement. The preservation people have tried to stop this, and they asked me for some support in form of a letter, and I think many people contributed letters to help guide our attention onto this building and the risk of losing it, especially as Chicago is kind of, trying to promote itself more and more as an architecture city and a tourist destination. So one of the things I think, we talked in the beginning about how you arm yourself with this information and this research, and then at some point it becomes important to use it for something, and it might not always be for a project that you're working on. In this case, I had done a lot of research on this concrete structure, having taught at IIT and taught in the core studio of which there's actually a class called concrete. But what's interesting about this design was that Bertrand Goldberg designed a hospital where the nurses would occupy the center. Here you can see the plan. So it's an open center, and the nurses could communicate freely with all the people in the hospital rooms. And he actually pulled the core off of the center. So I mean, in all the work that we've been doing with tall buildings, this is very unusual. And then you see this extreme cantilever. This is, as Bill Baker said in its defense, the only building in the world that uses this system. So it's quite an important building and pretty exciting building. I had been trying to get more attention on this building by working with different journalists and writers. And one of the people I really wanted to write about it was Michael Kimmelman from the New York Times, because I felt like, if we could get attention here on this building outside of Chicago, it might help to reinforce the importance of the building. And I had the opportunity to take him over to the site when he was in town. I think he was reviewing Todd Williams and Billy Chin's new building at University of Chicago. And I showed him the building, and he said, you guys will never win this because there's going to be an argument about jobs and new structures that are needed for research, et cetera, and it is outdated. Why don't you think about a third way? Why wouldn't you just add on to this building? And it really struck me as I just had never thought about reusing it in that way before. But I realized that I had all the people I needed to contact, to start this research, to do a quick sketch study of what could be done. And so the idea that the center was open was really an opportunity to think about putting in a new core down through the middle of this, actually probably using just about this area right here with the transportation going down the middle and support in this ring that already exists. I talked to my engineer. It's totally possible. Ron Klemenczyk from MKA, who designed the Aqua Tower structure with us, and it would be totally possible to do this. So I went back and worked with someone in my office over the weekend and through the next week, and we came up with this idea of putting a building on top of it. And so what's interesting is Ron Klemenczyk's office is in Seattle. It's actually in a building that has a pedestal much like this, that was designed in the 70s, and we would use a similar system to come through here and put this added square footage above the building. And what's kind of nice is that it's already kind of lends itself to this stacked solution. The stacked solution is something used in computing, when you add apps onto each other, and that could also apply to the building. So we started creating these renderings. Here's another one of the rendering. And what happened was Michael Kimmelman was saying he would write about this third way and trying to dislodge the kind of total preservation versus the needs of the university. And right around, that was like in the middle of the week, the alderman opened up a door saying he said he was inclined to destroy the building, but then said, if there's a eureka moment, I'm all ears. And so we had just finished our renderings at that point, so we sent them off to Kimmelman, who wrote the story. He came out with it, and it was like perfect timing. And it really, it totally caused a stir. It motivated people. People were energized and thinking that, we would actually maybe, have a win-win situation here. Not that we wanted to do this building, just that there are probably like 10 other designs that would also work. So it was pretty exciting. I think that it demonstrates, what you can do if your practice is geared up for seizing the moment, in a case like this. The sad news is that yesterday they decided to not landmark the building, and the mayor came down on the side of Northwestern, who really didn't want to be having to care for this building at all. They just want to get rid of it. So it ended up being a loss. I think we'll lose the building, but I think that what I learned is that that these pieces and chess pieces are always in play, and you need to be aware of the things going on around you, and you can actually have an impact on the world. So with that, I want to close, and I just want to invite you all to have a drink in the reception next door, and thank you very much.